The Kremlin has confirmed the participation of 49 African countries and several leaders, including South African President, in the second Russia-Africa summit starting Thursday in Moscow. African leaders will look to Russian President Vladimir Putin for concrete promises on grain supplies at a summit starting on Thursday, with some also likely to seek clarity and assurances on the future of Wagner mercenaries in the continent. The gathering in St Petersburg will take place 10 days after President Putin quits the Black Sea Agreement that had enabled Ukraine to ship food out of its southern port despite the 17-month-old conflict. At the first Russia-Africa summit in 2019, President Putin vowed to double Russia's trade with the continent within 5 years. However, it has stalled at around $18 billion a year. Joining us to discuss expectations from the second Russia-Africa summit is global affairs analyst Shahzada Rahim. Thank you for joining us on The World Now. This is the second Russia-Africa summit. What do you think would be the expectations this year?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, the expectations are very high, in my opinion, because we know that the Green Deal has been cancelled by Russia. So it's creating a huge problem for the African countries. So the African countries were saying, the Green Deal should be should resume, in order to resume the deliveries towards the poorer part of the world. But the problem here is because of the violation of the Green Deal agreement by the Ukraine and by the United Nations, the Russia has recently revoked it. So which has created a huge problem in the world. If we see the western part of the world, the Western leaders criticize Russia for starving the world. But here is the case. We have to understand 90% of this grain goes to the Western countries. Less than 5% of the grain goes to Africa. And less than 10% goes to the Asia and other parts of the global south. So here is the case. Now President Putin is saying we will provide grain and fertilizer free to the African region. So the expectation here, from this summit, which is going to held tomorrow, till 29th of July, the expectation is the African countries want to resume, they want to take some deal from President Putin in order to safely flow of the grain and the fertilizer to the African continent. So this would be the main discussion, in my opinion, because this summit is very important. As we see, 54 out of 49 countries are participating here in this summit. And plus, 19 head of states, African states, they are coming to personally attend this summit. So Putin will individually meet each and every leader according to the reports from the Kremlin. So this, obviously, in the end, there is going to be some way out concerning the Green Deal. So the Green Deal is the main theme of this conference, in my opinion. So if we see, the first summit, which was held in 2019, around 92 agreements were signed between the African countries and Russia.
Absolutely.
Worth $11 billion. So it has benefited a lot to the African countries, especially Nigeria. Nigeria was the exceptional example because it has benefited from Russia in energy sector and education sector.
But then, Mr. Rahim, if you look at it critically, since 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the story has been different. As a matter of fact, the summit this year, quite a number of African leaders will not be attending, and they are not aligned with Russia because of the war in Ukraine. What is the implication of this?
Definitely, there's a huge implication for Russia. We know that, Russia is not that much isolated, but most of the countries in Africa, they stayed neutral, or some of them are sided with Russia, and some took the same stance, the war should end quickly because it's creating a huge problem for the global economy. So from the Russian perspective, this is a huge event for them because, Russia wants to show itself on the global stage that Russia is not isolated because of the invasion of Ukraine. So the thing here is, the African leaders, they know that, there is a huge problem within Africa because there's a huge competition right now. Africa has become a hotbed of geopolitical competition between China, Russia, and America in the recent years. So the Africa needs security, the Africa needs food security, energy security. So the Russia is rich in these resources. So Africa knows, Russia has a lot to offer to Africa. But the thing is how it will go on. Because the Western countries, they're interfering, they're saying, they have threatened, according to reports, they were threatening individual leaders in Africa not to attend the summit. But despite that, 49 countries from Africa are participating in this summit. So this shows a huge progress.
Yes, as it is, Mr. Rahim, Africa, the continent has become like the bride, and everyone is caught in. Russia is caught in, the West is caught in. I mean, but then really for African people, they are also concerned about the kinds of alliances that their leaders go into. Imagine, for instance, having the Wagner mercenaries supporting the government in some states to quell the conflict in those countries. And just remember that the Wagner group only recently staged a mutiny in Russia, although that didn't last, for long. In the days ahead, how do you see this situation managed?
Yeah, the thing is we have to understand the approach of the Russia, modern Russia, the post-Soviet Russia towards Africa. We know that after the dissolution of Soviet Union, for 15 years, till 2015, Russia was not that much interested in the African continent. But after 2015, we see a huge shift, huge geopolitical shift when it comes to the foreign policy approach of Russia towards African region. So the emergence of the Wagner mercenaries, which have been engaged in the counterinsurgency operations across most part of the West Africa, especially from Mali, Chad, and Central African Republic, Niger. This mercenary group has been operating over there, under the shadows of the Kremlin, supported by the Kremlin, backed by the Russian Ministry of Defense. So the thing is, they have been supporting the governments, local governments over there, in order to deal with the gangs and local insurgencies in this region. So the problem here is the recent coup mutiny in Russia by the Wagner group has created a huge rift. So the people were asking, the experts were discussing this now, what will be the future of Wagner in Africa? Mm-hmm. But the thing here is President Vladimir Putin has made it clear that the Wagner will continue its operation in Africa, but under the authority of the Russian Ministry of Defense. So, and we have seen a rapid example from the Niger government, which said we will accept any kind of forces from the Russia. It doesn't matter whether it's Wagner or some kind of. So it will not impact the foreign security mission of Russia in African region in particular.
All right then. Global Affairs Analyst Shahzada Rahim, thank you for talking to us on The World Now.
Thank you for having me.